Welcome to this session of the Utah League of Cities and Towns Utah APA Conference. My name is Paul Allred. I'm the Community Development Director for the City of Holiday. It's really great to be here with all of you today. We have an excellent presentation with three of our presenters that we'll introduce in just a minute. But to begin, we're going to recognize our sponsor, which is in the upper left corner. Hopefully all of you can see that. That's GSBS. I think that's Gillies, Stramsky, Brems, and Smith Architects. I've worked with them before. They are a very, very fine architectural and planning firm here in the state of Utah. So we thank them for their participation and their sponsorship. So our session today is called Ordinance Without Tears, mostly. And so we're hopefully going to hear from our presenters about a helpful way that all of us can work on our code amendments and our text and in a maybe a less stressful way. So to begin, we're going to have a little poll. Nate Hogan, who is our tech specialist today. Thank you for being with us, Nate. Nate is going to do a poll right now of those who are participating. So if you would go ahead and participate there and tell us who you are, what your position is, then we can look at that in our presenters and I will know who we are talking to. So thank you. Please go ahead and do that. Has everybody had a chance to do that? Okay, Nate, do we have okay, there we go. For those of you who, hopefully everybody got a chance to indicate what your position is. It looks like we have real mixture, council members, 25%, 50% staff. I kind of expected that. And it's great to see legal counsel, 13%. So we have somebody who just loves to attend conferences. Well, good, welcome to you as well. So thank you. Hopefully this will shed a lot of light on this difficult part of what cities do. So thank you, Nate. We'll close that now. And I'd like to introduce Mike Hansen, Ryan Robinson, and Ben Levenger in that order. If you guys would like to introduce yourself, give us a little background about you, and then we'll jump right into the presentation. Go ahead, Mike.
Outstanding. Yeah, Mike Hansen. I am with Rural Community Consultants, and most people don't know me from, well, half the folks probably in the conference know me from that role, but most actually probably know me from my days at the state. I was in the governor's office for what feels like forever, even had a little stint in the cabinet, which was really weird. But we worked on rural issues, worked on state and local government type issues. Worked with cities, counties, and the state, worked with the federal government a little bit. The work we like to do at Rural Community Consultants is a little more holistic. We specialize in rural, which means you wear all the hats. So, I'll give you.
Yep, I'm Ryan Robinson. I also work with Mike at Rural Community Consultants. I think that should be my bio line. I should just stop there. But before this, I worked for a town up in Summit County. Spent some time there, worked at a political center while I was going to school, worked a lot with cities and towns and counties in that area. Just excited to be here.
Ben Levenger with Downtown Redevelopment Services. Our specialty is downtown planning, downtown ordinances, maintenance, facades, adaptive reuse. Love the state of Utah and happy to be here.
Give us a little, hey, each one of you tell us where you went to school. Where are you from?
Ben's is the one that's interesting.
Go ahead, Ben.
Bachelor's at Utah State, master's at University of Utah, and a master's at Kent State University.
Great. Where are you speaking from today, Ben?
Afton, Wyoming.
Oh, beautiful place. Lucky you. Lucky you. How about you, Mike?
I did my undergrad in planning up at the University of Utah, went on and got an MPA with the University of Utah, and then I got a degree, it's a master's degree in political economy from a liberal arts school in Cedar City. It was called George Wythe.
Okay. Ryan, how about you? Where are you at today?
Yep. So I'm just at my house here in Springville. We have barns. I don't know. Grew up in Parowan, Utah. Got a bachelor's and master's from SUU.
Great. Thanks for that background. We're going to go ahead and let you guys launch into your presentation. And I'll let you do it in order, and then you'll run your slideshow from there. So go ahead, and if there's anybody who has a question along the way, we'll try to recognize you at an appropriate point in time. We want to entertain questions, but there's a lot of information to cover in your presentation. All right, go ahead, guys.
Can everybody see the screen?
Yep.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, I guess I'll take the lead on that one. Our topic is ordinances without tiers, and mostly should probably be in parentheses there or quotation marks, because there's always tiers. Ordinances are about compromise, and that's what we're going to talk about today, is trying to identify where we can all do better in our ordinance work and how we can do so through stronger partnerships and newer technology, and how we can use that in our process. So what we'll cover is, Mike, you guys are going to talk about what are ordinances and how do they work. You guys are the expert in that. I'll let you guys take that one on. Rethinking the ordinance process, and both all three, Mike, Ryan, and I will share that one. Next, we'll go to critical first steps, and then aiding implementation. So.
All right. So when we start thinking about land use ordinances, and well, actually municipal ordinances generally, everyone thinks about movies, right? Everybody, when you look at a town, most people don't understand, but it's kind of like it's a pyramid where every layer has to kind of support the other layer, right? So the bottom layer, we always argue, is your vision. And your second layer then should be ordinances, regulations, and investments. And then you get into more detailed things that cities do, like design guidelines. So that ordinance layer, though, is well, it's the vision implemented in theory. And so that's what, as consultants, that's what we're always trying to do, is say, before we can fix what's broken in your ordinance, we have to know what you're trying to do with it. And, you know, how well is it working? Is it building the things you think it is? So anyway, before we get into ordinances and that compromise idea a little bit, we wanted to talk just for a second about how to get there. I think if you're joining this session, you're thinking, oh, geez, I've got an ordinance project I've got to do. I don't want to do. It brings pain. There's got to be a faster, better way. So let me give you just a little bit of a side presentation here to show you. We think that there is a better way. So anyway, you look at this and you're like, well, some things never change, right? People like to go to movies. They like to be entertained. Go to the next slide. And they've been doing it for a very long time. But even though movies don't change, other parts of the movies do. So you used to go to a movie theater, right? And you'd buy one ticket and watch one show, and they'd kick you out and clean up after you, supposedly. And then Blockbuster comes along, and then the way to watch a movie was, well, it's still one at a time, and I still got to work with a store, and I got to get it back on time. But at least I have a lot more autonomy. I can take this home and watch it 3 times or whatever. And then Netflix comes along, and you can kind of see how they each make the previous one, we think, make them not obsolete, but a lot less attractive. Netflix comes along, and you can kind of watch almost any movie because you're just trickling a small amount in, you know, for a monthly subscription. And then you watch whatever you want, and there really isn't a lot of third-party interaction unless you have a problem and you want third-party interaction, right? Go to the next one. So when it comes to code, yes, this has to do with codes and ordinances because we're consultants. We're telling you it does. There's a traditional approach. When you go to get your codes updated, you're either going to try to do it yourself and you pull your hair out until you finally decide, I need help. So you're going to go out and you're going to hire a consultant. It's going to be expensive and there's going to be a time frame because you as a town have, you're going to create a tension in this process because you as a town, you're incentivized to keep that consultant around as long as you can. The consultant is incentivized to get done with you as soon as they, as soon as they can because they got to go do other work. So it's going to be interesting. So you got to keep a time frame in there. The alternative, as far as ordinance development, was you focus on one movie at a time. I'm sorry, this made sense last night, but this is we as a town need to fix our short-term rental ordinance because we don't have one or something like that, right? So you might go out for a third party to help you do that, like a county staff. We've got AOG planners out there. More often than not, you're also seeing towns go out and they just copy the neighbor's code or Park Cities. We're arguing that there's a new way to do it. It's the Netflix way. What if a city could just fund things through a monthly fee and they'd have access to whatever they're interested in? There's always new movies coming, new codes, templates, and that these are cultivated templates, so they're not just copying the neighbors. It's showing you how to do things. You can go at your own pace, and the third-party involvement's there if you want them, and if not, you're not paying for them. Let's go to the next slide. So we don't expect you to read this. Sorry, don't pass out. But with the traditional approach, we'll explain, from the consulting side and from the city side, there's a lot of friction, to be blunt. This is the movie theater way of doing your ordinances. You first have to make a decision. That is a huge step. It's not to be taken for granted. Once you get to a decision, then you've got to create the RFP, and then you got to find a way to pay for it. And then you've got to, when you hire someone, months are going by in this process. Once you hire somebody, then you have to bring the consultant up to speed with all the nuances that you've been struggling with and so forth. And the consultant's coming in with a blank piece of paper most often. When the consultants are done, they then hand it back as a draft and say, okay, what do you think? And it's usually, I call it a 3-ring binder. It's usually pretty involved. There's a lot of complexity, and it feels like on the city side, you might be starting over because you're like, wait, what did we tell them and why did they do this and so forth. As we mentioned earlier, your adoption of these new codes, sometimes it's driven by the budget. It's just, oh, well, we're out of hours, so I think you've got a good draft. But then, every time the consultant's paid and they leave. And so we'll tell you, as a consultant, trying to do ordinance projects, and this number on the bottom is totally variable. We've done ordinance projects that were into 2 years on contract because they don't want to let us go. They want to just, what if we fix this and what if we touch that and so forth. But I can't imagine doing a really good ordinance project for less than 8 months. But the costs, the contracts we've done, a really big range, but you should probably expect to go 20 to 60, who knows. We've done some for more and less, but anyway, go on to the next one.
Can I jump in on that before you go there too, Mike?
Please.
With the with these updates that we've done too, it's during that 8 to 12 months, usually up to 2 years that we've done, there's at least one legislative session that happens during that. And so we're in the middle of this project, legislative session comes in, there's a whole chapter that needs to be changed now too. So you're starting over again there, working on that same budget, and the same thing that happens there too. So there's a increased chance of frustration there from the consultant who's got to start over on this part now, and the town who's trying to get the most out of their money with that.
Yeah. It could also be a change of a mayor, or half the planning commission decides this is more work than they thought they signed up for. There's a lot of risk when you do big omnibus projects like that. Well, anyway, we call
it a change in staff, guys.
Or change in staff. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. We've experienced that. That's just awesome. So we've tried to figure out as consultants, what's the Netflix of ordinance development, and we think we've built it. And Ben's got a version as well we'd like to show a little bit later here, but this one's called Civic Link. So let's move into it just really briefly. We had to make it look like a queue. So that's why it says Civic Link. Again, don't read this, read it later. But we think that Civic Link is an online library, basically. So consultants like Ben or RCC, like we'll go out and we'll do a big project for a town. But when we're done, you know, we give them that solution, but there are certain lessons learned that kind of stay there unless we get hired to do the same thing in another town. So what we've done is we tried to codify all those best practices. We have built templates of certain ordinances. And again, this applies to more of the smaller communities where the development is a little bit more predictable. And I know it's contentious everywhere, but maybe it's not as contentious. It's not like we're trying to develop downtown Main Street, Park City. But again, remember rural, but we've created these things. And then what we do is we show this part of your ordinance needs to be customized. You can't just copy the neighbors. This is the part that you need to make sure matches your vision. Discuss this. The other stuff is kind of legal boilerplate, or it's, you know, it's already been there. The reason why we also think the Netflix model works is it's harder and harder for communities to find grant funding for ordinance work. There aren't a lot of options with that. The other thing though is because we're consultants and we're hosting best practice guidance, we have a vested interest to make sure it's constantly updated. So if some town updates their code, you know, 2 years ago, and then the law changes, we have notes that say this town took our template and built a code off of it. We should go tell them that the law just changed. So we think that that's something that, you know, it's more Netflixy. You know, like you watch a spaghetti Western, they're going to start trying to get you to watch more of those. Anyway, and then the other one that most consultants don't want to admit is most consultants are actually really good at some stuff, but not always everything. And so that's why we try to get teams like a Netflix thing. You know, you picture all these different movies, all these different code issues. Maybe they're not all written by us, and they all get into this library, and then you do have kind of specialists helping you on specialized issues. All right, should probably move on. Just really quick, we think the cost of this is also going to be a benefit for small towns. We think if you were to pay, say, $300 a month or something for that subscription, and you did one issue a month, that's a lot of discipline for a small town. I know that. But if you did that, just the cost is only $3,600. And remember, my other one was something, you know, annually. My other cost was $25,000 to $50,000. So we think this is just the new way of doing it. I think that's. I think, do I have another slide at the end here? Yeah. Oh. Well, this one's also cool. The other thing with Netflix, if you buy a movie, it's in your library. We believe that if you do code and you use our tools, for sure, we're going to help you host it. So that's coming very soon. We're thinking probably end of October, actually, that not only are we going to change the way consulting works so that we're helping you write code, we're going to help you host it as well. Make it super accessible and stuff. So anyway.
Mike?
Yeah.
Mike, a question from moderator. What is code hosting? Can you define that? What does it mean?
A lot of towns use, there's some bigger companies, Municipal Code Online, Sterling Codifiers was in it recently. Oh, I forgot the other one. I just dropped Code. Yeah, there's Municode and Code. Anyway, it's this, you take your code and you put it up on a ADA accessible website, and people can just Google search what the dog rules are. Because, you know, and when you're on the city side, we think that's not very Netflixy to have one planner who knows everything in the code, supposedly. And then, you know, here's my supplementary conditions. And, oh, and here's this for off-street parking. And over here's a chapter about this. When you're on the development side, it's so hard to navigate that. We think you should be able to search it. If I want to build a backyard chicken coop, I shouldn't even have to call the city. I should be able to keyword search. Anyway, that's what we mean by hosting. We want to find a service that's maybe not as, you know, robust as those guys that do that for a living, but something like that. Most small towns, if you want to do something in a smaller town, you have to find the clerk and they have to find their code and then you have to look yourself up. It's not really transparent or straightforward, and administratively it's kind of important. So we just think this is important.
Thanks for that explanation. That's very helpful.
Sure. All right, let's turn it back to Ben, and he'll get back to, when you get into those discussions, you do need to build your code correctly.
So thanks, Mike. As we talked earlier, Mike's more a big community picture. We're downtown people, and we're very visionary in process. We like community input. And so when we come into a community and look at ordinances, we're often targeted, like Mike said, in a small community into a certain area. We have a certain focus or a certain item we're trying to get a vision for. The problem is when you do it that piecemeal way or patchwork way, you don't have a good vision for your community about the overall process. So what I want to talk about briefly is rethinking the process of ordinances. And when we say this, we are thinking more of a more inclusive process. So instead of putting out fires, which every rural community knows how this goes, and every big city, you're not being proactive 99% of the time. You're trying to be proactive, but the fires keep dragging in every other direction in town. So when you start thinking about this, think of a more inclusive process, identifying the issue, looking for a solution, gathering input, and here's the big word here, compromise. Making sure everybody understands codes, development, any of this is all about compromise. Nobody comes out of this with a win-win scenario. Test the results and then alter and amend. And this process is very cyclical, and you see the wonderful little arrows there, but at the end of the day, what it's about is if you include the public in the process, your adoption time will be significantly streamlined. You don't have to worry about angry people showing up to your council meetings. You don't have to worry about people not understanding it. If they're part of the process from the beginning, you have a collective vision that will support the look, feel, and operation of the municipality. And going through that ordinance and rethinking it from the ground up, you have that collective vision. So when we talk about together, which is what this is, you're revisioning the process together. You're creating a collective vision. You're listening, you're testing, you're altering, you're partnering with your residents, and that's a big thing. There's often in communities, especially small communities, he said, she said, or what we lovingly term us versus them. People don't feel that the council listens to the residents don't feel that the council is listening to anybody. Business owners are just out there on their own. Nobody ever supports them. Everybody's heard this. This togetherness process is a great way to get rid of those items and build back up from a common point or a common vision for your community. So compromise begins with vision. Working together will help your community succeed. And important here is you need to understand the who and the what through community visioning. Who and what, the 5 W's, who, what, when, where, why, and if you want to throw an H in there, how. But with codes, you want to talk about who and what. And if you can understand who in the process, you'll be able to have a good, strong community. And the way you understand who and what is through these next items. We're talking about frank conversations. You need to be able to sit down, get to the root issue. And we're working in Wyoming this week, and I can tell you, I've never seen a community that is more dysfunctional than Kemmerer, Wyoming. If any of you has ever been to Kemmerer, you'll know exactly what I mean. Everybody's in their own little silos. They're all talking about things that happened 40 years, divisive for 40 years. In order to create this compromise or this meaning, you have to get back to your root issues. You have to get back to the bottom, and where all of you became divisive, you need to start building up layer by layer from that point. Because if you don't, everybody's going to remain siloed in their own little topics or areas. Through this, you'll determine what issues are valid through fact finding. You'll have that convergence point, and you'll be able to understand what the impact is going up the line. Trickle is very big in this area. Creating the common understanding, you just need to make sure people understand that as you are creating these visions, you're supporting and creating ordinances to support the overall vision that are good for your community. And they need to understand how they're all tied back together to that unified vision. And if you can, as a council, as a planner, as a city staff, whatever it may be, tie back to that one unified vision, you'll be in much better condition for adoption or putting elements in place or helping maybe through some challenging changes that are coming up as your rural community diversifies as the metropolitan plague begins to spread outward due to COVID.
Hey, Ben,
And, yes.
question for you. These pictures are interesting. As they pop up, is there any way to tell us where these are? I'm curious. I'm sure others
Sure.
are as well.
Let's go back. So that one is Fairplay, Colorado, one of the highest communities in the country at almost 11,000 feet. That, believe it or not, was taken in June. So
That's awesome.
I was stuck in a freak snowstorm in the beginning of June. It was great.
This is Colorado, the snowy one?
Yeah. Everybody should know where that's Kaysville. Beautiful building that's been used inappropriately.
That's where I live.
I'm sorry. So this bottom picture is we ran a public input meeting in downtown Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This one is Maine. This is Fairplay in August when there is no snow. Believe it or not, that hotel was a brothel for about 120 years. Again, Damascotta. And this one is Bath, Maine. We do a fair amount of work in Maine, in the New England coast and small downtowns.
Yeah.
So a lot of nice pictures. And if anybody's listening, this is what good downtown signage looks like. You can see my cursor. Really nice signs, small, simple, effective, graphic.
Yep. Thank you for that, Ben.
And this is Cokeville, Wyoming. It's pretty bleak.
Been there.
Pennsylvania, but knowing your assets. When you go into your community, you need to know what your assets are. Do you have unique architecture? Do you have natural assets, rivers, mountains, trails? Do you have community celebration events, historical elements? These items all play into that vision for your community because that's part of your shared history. It's part of your shared knowledge of each other. And that shapes your ordinances because your ordinances are going to shape how people use your town. And we're speeding through this. This will be 100% made available online. We're trying to get through this so there's time for questions at the end. So both Mike's and my contact information should be there. And if there's questions, feel free to reach out. Inclusive community input, this goes without saying. If you don't have community input, you don't have a plan, and your ordinances are going to be really tough to pass through your council. Your council is going to get angry calls about how it didn't meet that one neighborhood or development's guidelines and blah, blah, blah. Everybody that's ever a planner or been a city official knows what this is. But what we highlight here is you need to make sure when you talk about ordinances, it's a multi-sensory experience. A lot of people, by the breakdown, there's 4 types of learners in the world: seers, feelers, thinkers, and doers. Something like 80% of the world falls into the doers category. And they need to have a tactile or multi-sensory experience. You need to give them something that talks about ordinances, but it will give them a tactile item to move around, play, help them understand. That 80% of the people is the bulk of your residents. You need to give them the draft ordinances and this public input in a method that they're going to feel comfortable also giving you feedback. The other thing we'll highlight here, in the modern day and age, you need to go to where your residents are. You can't expect them to come to a public meeting. You need to go to where they are. That means you're going to a farmer's market, you're going to a middle school, you're going to a high school football game. It doesn't matter. You need to go to where they are because nobody's going to take time to go talk to you at a public input meeting and give you constructive feedback. The people that are often at a public input meeting are people that may be more negative or want to have their voice heard because it hasn't been heard for a long time. They're usually the least constructive of the feedback you're going to get. Focusing on achievable goals, and this goes back to ordinances in a certain way. These goals are something that has to be easily attained and action-oriented. Everybody should know where this is. And if you don't know where this picture is, go find Helper, Utah on a Friday, the first Friday of the month. They have beautiful neon and it is fantastic. But you need to build your achievable goals in a method in which people know the ordinances are going towards the greater community vision or the greater community goal. Their ordinances are achieving it, they're identifying it, and you're fostering a climate where you're getting rid of apathy because people felt like their visions were heard. And the council adopted ordinances or resolutions or whatever it may be to support that goal. Action-oriented and specific, again, planners know all about this. Your ordinances should help you dictate who, what, when, where, and how. And if you're not able to get that out of your ordinances, you do not have a good set of ordinances for your community. Ordinances, the way we lovingly term them, are community guidance. That's what they are. You need to make sure that they answer who, what, when, where, and how. They should be action-oriented, time-bound. I believe the term is what? SMART, specific, measurable, attainable, R&T. Time-bound, I don't know what R is. It's been a long week. Prioritized, so make sure your ordinances are prioritized for implementation. And something that Mike brought up, ordinances are not a one-time thing. Many communities spend $50,000 or $60,000 and go, we're set for 50 years, we're not doing them again. Well, 5 years down the line, they're changing something. And that's where this prioritized item comes in, because if you know you've got development coming in or you've got pressures from your water and sewer distribution systems, you've got to be able to prioritize these ordinance changes to make things happen in the right time frames. Planning for the short and the long, this goes back to ordinances in a very simple way. Your ordinances can't be so far-sighted that they don't plan for the current day, but they also can't be so short-sighted that they don't plan for the future. Your ordinances, and the really important ones that focus around development and infrastructure and all these other elements, should have multiple milestones, 2 to 3 years, 3 to 7 years, and 7 to 15 years. It gives the community something to go back on over time, to go ahead and look at and update on a regular basis. It gives them an action-oriented follow-up time frame for the community to follow. It also can help you with your progress, and it'll help the community understand you're still listening if every once in a while you do make a few changes. Map for your community, master plans and ordinances, these types of items, and sorry, work across the country. Some states call them comp plans, some general plans, some ordinances, some development code. We find if we use the word master plan, it's fairly general enough, people know what that means. Master plans are your guidance. And this is where your ordinances come in. You're going to use these to implement the vision of your community. There's going to be roadblocks. The ordinances are going to be found to be painful in some areas, contradictory in some areas. These are times where you need to go back and amend them. But without this plan in place, you're not going to have a good, solid movement forward for your ordinances. So let's talk about a few items to help implement your ordinances. The dirt of development, and I threw this in there because development is big in Utah. Development runs everything in Utah. And I think it's time we take a step back from that personally, but let's talk about mastering the duration, the intensity, the rate, and the timing of development in your community. So through the ordinances, you can help dictate the dirt. You can help determine what ordinances are going where, land use maps, zoning. You can determine what method your community is going to use to impact your neighborhoods. You can determine if your community is development ready. So do your ordinances have anything for helping attract the right type of development, the right amenities that you need? It'll allow your community to give feedback about development. And this is one of the biggest things. Through mastering dirt of development, you get to have feedback from the community and have them tell you what's missing and how do they want their community to look? What type of development is that? And unfortunately, it aids in opportunity zone attraction, but it's a different process. So in order to master the dirt of development, you need to look at your existing conditions. And this goes into ordinances in a couple of ways, but if you don't know where you are, you don't have a map to know where you need to go. In order to have a map, you need to have 2 points and a line between it. The existing conditions is the beginning point, your unified vision is the end point, and everything else in the middle is your path to go between them. You need to make gap analysis, understand what, and if anybody knows, this is Brigham City. right? But if you don't have a gap analysis, you don't know what type of items that you need to mix together, or what your community is missing, what's underserved, oversaturated. And through your ordinance, you can start to dictate that breakdown from what the gap analysis will tell you. Mike, you're better at land use maps. Do you want to step in on how land use maps and ordinances work together?
Yeah, like we tried to talk about a little bit earlier, the land use map, I know in Utah State Code, it doesn't specifically say you need to have a future land use map. We just think that's an oversight. I can't understand how a general plan could be put into place without going through a mapping process, especially since it's a rationale for zoning. Anyway, we think it's a fundamental part. We've always done that in every project we've done, is a future land use map. Future land use maps, though, don't function exactly the way a zoning map does. One thing that Ben and I found, we were working in a town, and when you zoom in on a neighborhood, with those Esri story maps, and on one side you have today's zoning, and on the other side you have the future land use map or the proposed land use map. I think the people in public love that, because they say, well, what are you really doing to my neighborhood? That's all I really care about, right? Or my area of interest. And so they love to be able to zoom in and look. The thing that's interesting, though, is if you do a good future land use map, I would argue colors don't have to match up parcel lines exact the way zoning does. You can say this is a corridor for commercial. You don't necessarily say this parcel will only ever be, unless you're going to adopt your general plan as an ordinance. I would recommend you just kind of keep it more about patterns and the interaction with these different types of land uses. But nevertheless, when you get into the property rights, which of course come from the zoning map, that property owner needs to be able to understand why they have this designation or this bundle of rights. And if they can't see it, I call it the line of sight. If they can't be for where they're at, they can't look through the ordinance and into the vision of the general plan and understand, oh, I'm in a growing area, I need to expect neighbors with more density or something. If they can't see that, then your map's not right, and your plan's not right, and your codes, they're just not aligned, and you need to do that work.
And that's why this is such an important topic for ordinances, because they all tie back together. And this is one of those pieces that people don't seem to understand, is it's all tied back together. And without the congruency, developers and development have a way to find loopholes, if that's a polite way to say it. And for better or worse, that can be very impactful to your community.
Yeah, and actually to tack onto that plain language statute that came out recently, which shouldn't have even had to been written. Don't you think about that? Dear cities, you have to write it in a way people can understand. That shouldn't have to be said, but since it is, I always tell communities, if there's a dispute, if people can't understand what your codes are, if it's not clear why they're getting this designation, the tie goes to the applicant, not to the city. And that's a critical thing.
Exactly. The next one on the list is what we call building transformation strategies. Every community has what our office lovingly calls the white whale. It's transferred hands from the developers 5 times. Everybody promises the world out of adaptive reuse of this building. Nothing ever happens out of it. And it's a vicious cycle, because one day we're going to do it. And then a year later, nothing's happened. Windows are broken, everything's gone. But with your codes and ordinances, you need to bring into place what uses can each building have. And this goes back to your land use map and your future land use and your zoning designations. Again, it's all tied together. You need to understand what potential end users are going to be in that building. Again, some bad photos. I hate transferring between Google Slides and PowerPoint. It screws all kinds of things up. This is again about visioning. It's not necessarily just about what is best for the dollars. It's what's best for the community. What do we need in our corridors to attract people in? What we often hear as a code issue for adaptive reuse is ADA applicability. ADA is not a reason to stop anything. Work with your code enforcement, understand what the minimums are. And the only thing I can give you is hire a really good architect. They will work their magic around that ADA applicability all day long. We're running out of, well, we still have 30 minutes? Somewhere in there?
Yes.
Okay. So due diligence reports, once you've mastered this dirt of development, you need to start marketing it so you can put into place your codes and your ordinances. And you need to market out these structures and these buildings and tell people what is going into each category and where things should be. In development, this is thrown in there for Utah specifically, because you guys as a community can start to dictate that dirt through telling people what is the desired use in each property. You work with property owners to make these sheets, help them understand what the benefits are, but you can at some point in time start dictating when a developer comes to town and says, I want to put a mixed use building in, you've got 5 parcels identified exactly where you want them to go, and you can help people understand where it's going to go. Don't let the developers tell you what to do. The municipality answers to the citizens, and the citizens should be in charge of what happens on property, especially in commercial cores. Developer packages, again, we'll go through that one, but what I want to focus on here is creation of a SPOC, and this is big for your ordinances. You need to have a single point of contact in your municipality that knows where to go, what to do, who to look for, and they don't need to be the most knowledgeable person. They don't need to know every answer. What they need to know is where to go to look for the answer, or who to talk to for the answer, and how to convey that message back out. So when we're talking about ordinances, a developer comes into town, or somebody, let's make it a little easier. Somebody in a small lot wants to put up a shed. There should be a spot on the website where if you can't find it on a new Civic Link database, who the heck do you call to find out where you're allowed to put your shed, what size it is, what you can do? That goes back to that SPOC. Don't like to work. Developers don't like to work. A lot of government employees don't like to work. So you need to make things easy. This is a critical role in a community that is looking to implement an action-oriented ordinance, general plan, or any of it. If you can create a SPOC, this person is going to be continually busy to get the information to and from the right individuals, help people understand the timelines, whatever the process is that needs to be done. We know a lot of communities don't have this opportunity in-house, and this is where Civic Link comes in. This is something that they can help with. They're a database for this type of item. But if that's something that is still out of budget, put a simple PDF as a download on your site with what departments, phone numbers, emails, names, upload it every once in a while, update it, just make sure people know where to go. And I look at this, and the screen shows Murray's website. Melinda Greenwood is not an economic development professional. She's not a community development professional, but she is the director because she knows a little bit about everything, but she also is smart enough to know where to go to get the answers and who to talk to get those. That's what she's put on here is that SPOC, is because that's her role. Is she's not there to interpret, she's there to help facilitate the development and community economic development efforts for the community. Creation of a database. This goes back to Civic Link. It's important things are online. I swear a developer must be sitting in their pajamas, sitting in their easy chair in their living room, trying to look up codes, figuring out where they want to put their next building, because they don't put in much more effort than that anymore. So if you can make it all online for them, the best thing we've seen is having a portal for communities, underutilized parcels, roles that the community is looking to push, strategies, any of those things. Put it online, make it known, not have it buried 19 levels under a website heading. Have it be something very clear, very concise, easy to see. If you go down this process with the who and where and what, you'll be able to get the benefits of dictating that in your community, using and implementing the ordinances for the vision of the public. Again, it will also help your community become more proactive and less reactive to everything that happens in your community. Last thing we're going to talk about is design guidelines, and similar to Mike, we have one that's called Uni Guides. It's a database for downtown and Commercial corridor facade guidelines, landscape, streetscape, facade, signage, you name it. But we have a database of about, at this point, we launched it back in March. We have 87 communities currently on our list for downtown guidelines. If you're interested, it's muniguides.com. We host everything there for the communities. We update the items every couple of years. And we help them through their ordinance review processes for that. So we'll talk about facade guidelines. Facades are the building face. If anybody doesn't know, and if you don't know, I don't think you may have understood what ordinance is to this point so far. But here nor there, you might have been the one guy that just loved presentations at trade shows. Facades dictate the space and the feel of the built environment. It's where people interact. It's important that your ordinances support facades, and your facades support your ordinances and your guidelines. Your development and infill, this goes without saying. Everybody's seen the strip mall effect in suburban areas. Nothing kills the look and feel of a community better than a strip mall. It will just destroy the look and feel of your community. So dictating the infill and development in your guidelines, so where it is, how high you can go before a step back, what type of facades it has, where signage goes, overall general massing and height, how much of the yard it can take up, how much of the facility. That's important when you're designing a downtown corridor or even a commercial corridor. People don't want to have to look past those outlots anymore to see what's in the strip mall. The idea of a strip mall worked great when those outlots weren't sold. Now you've got a Popeye's chicken or a Chick-fil-A, and there's so many gosh darn cars, you can't even tell what's in the strip mall behind it. If you haven't been to the Chick-fil-A in Murray, nobody even knows what's in the strip mall behind it because you don't go past Chick-fil-A. But what this does is that you need to demonstrate to people what the acceptable infill and development is in your community. And all these are based off the community input. So it's a great thing to do when you do your ordinances or you do your general plan. It's just an additional level of community input that you're doing through the process. Signage. Signage is huge in your community. And believe it or not, big internally lit LED signs advertise less well than the little round sign that sticks out from the building. I think I've been in 280 downtowns in the last 5 years, and everybody says I need an LED sign and needs to scroll. Nobody wants to turn their head like this to look at what's going on as they drive down the road. They want to see the sign, and 75% graphic, 25% words, simple red, green, blue colors will help advertise your business well more than an LED sign will. When we talk about signage, it's simple, it's timeless, it's classic, something that doesn't need to be replaced every 5 years when a fad comes around. Streetscape guidelines, you'll see a lot of pictures here of Logan. Logan has one of the best main streets in the Intermountain West. And if you haven't been up there lately, make sure you use 10th West and go into the back of the parking lots. Don't drive down Main Street. Streetscape guidelines, this is the space where people interact. They talk, they feel that they're part of the community. And these guidelines are just as important as any ordinance code, but they're critical for making sure that your community has that necessary third place. There's live, work, play. In many communities, this is that play location, especially as adults. When you're kids, the play location is the park. When you're an adult, it's a commercial corridor. Vegetation guidelines. I would love to see somebody put in a best management practice like this for stormwater retention somewhere in Utah. I don't think it's ever going to happen though. But vegetation, plant and tiers, low cost, low maintenance, more resilient, year-round presence. The guidelines that this creates will be implemented in a overlay district or a zoning district, and the vegetation should have a similar palette look or feel to make sure people know that the place is really a place. It's a big area. Process of guidelines, community input, determine the vision, easy to understand and implement guides, attach to a zoning district, very critical, and amend to the general plan. A lot of communities miss that last step. In order for your council to, enforce these items through code enforcement practices, you must amend them to the general plan, some fashion, form, however that works. Utilize them as an online database. Here's a picture of one of the sites that we have for Mars, Pennsylvania. And yes, there is a community called Mars. And they have a post office that is incredibly busy because you mailed your postcard from Mars. But nonetheless, design guidelines like ordinances, like Civic Link, need to be online. The business owners need to have easy access. The people making the signage need to have easy access. It needs to be something people can see. It's publicly available. And the big thing is it's always working. You don't have to call and give voicemail to the city planner who's going to go, I don't know, but I'll get back to you in a month. They're always there. You can search them yourself, but there's always a city planner to help interpret them if you get lost. Benefits of the guidelines, you build community character, improve the look and feel, and you preserve your community's unique character specifically to a downtown core. Again, throw it out there. If you haven't been to Help or Go at Night, great neon. 5-year plans, this is more in Mike's category. I'll turn it back to Mike for this one.
If I remember to unmute myself. We think that 5 years is a good implementation. Now, I know that sounds incriminating because we are really proud of the plans we build for communities, and so we know they're going to sit on the shelf for another 20 years like the last one. As a consultant, you can't actually tease your clients that much, but 5-year is a good, if you're going to take action and really make some changes, 5 years is a great window. Go to the next one. And so the benefits is it's, when you talk about SMART goals, it's hard to say how specific can you get if you have a 10-year horizon or a 12-year horizon or something. No, get it to 5 years. You think you know who the staff is. You think you know kind of what the budget outlook's going to be. You know how to document actions, and people will keep their attention span a lot more for a shorter timeline like that. And again, as Ben mentioned earlier, it's the who, what, when, where, and how. All of that needs to be in a plan if it's going to move anywhere. If you're looking for shelfware, we have some examples that you could follow that maybe don't have those. Okay.
And add to that, Mike, it's important for your 5-year plan, not just to answer those, but also include what in our company we lovingly call the roles and responsibilities matrix. It should answer who, what, when, where, and how, but more importantly, it's a time frame that's a public document. It's holding people accountable for their actions, and it's not just the municipality. If there's elements the businesses need to do to hold up their end of the bargain, it gets clearly documented. You need to tell people they're accountable for their specific actions. And through creating that matrix, you're holding people accountable to hold up their end of the bargain.
Yeah, absolutely. As he mentioned, the roles and responsibilities matrix. This is where you're writing things down. And again, in government, we can write things down and then it disappears. This is the thing that I will continue to hit this key on the keyboard. But if the city council annually, not every, I know they've got other stuff to deal with, but if they could just take some time, hopefully every year, they step back out of their role of making decisions and being kind of implementation focused and responsive. But they get proactive once a year and they take an hour and do a dinner work session with the planning commission if you can, but pull out your roles and responsibilities matrix and just say, hey, just checking. Where are we at on da, 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 da. If they can do this before budget season, right at the beginning, before everybody comes with hat in hand, it puts the decision makers in a better frame of mind, right? That they can then step back and say, we need to make strategic investments this year instead of just putting out fires all over the place. Anyway,
Before you move on, Mike, can I throw something in with that too? This is helpful too if you do it before people sign up for election stuff.
Yeah.
You got new city council members coming in, or mayors, or different things. If you have this meeting before, invite the public to it. That way you hit the ground running and it's not, well, last month we spent all this time and now I've got new elected officials, we have to do it again. And so just maybe planning that out a little better.
That's great. Yeah, and funding options change. This matrix isn't, we like to give here's your general plan and then here's your report on the side, but we don't necessarily need them to adopt the matrix, even though that would definitely put some fire underneath it. Sometimes the grant runs out or the new grant comes out or something like that. This needs to be a living document if it's going to be effective.
I think that's it.
And then, yeah, we're open to any questions. We knew we were before lunch, so.
Well, great presentation, guys. As somebody who's been in the profession for a long time, since 1987, I learned something new every time. I think there's some real innovative ideas in here that all cities could use, regardless of the size. From my own perspective, if I could, I would just say that if you ask your everyday city planner out there what their stress level is and how much time they have to devote to doing good text amendments, doing good general plans, master plans, they'll tell you there's not enough. There's no way to do that. And that's where cities go wrong, because it's a waterfall effect. You don't have good ordinances, you get bad development. You get bad development, you have bad economics. Then you have a poor community vision. And it just goes from there. It can take a long time to turn that ship around. It's like turning a tanker around in the ocean. It's kind of impossible. It takes a long time. So I think these resources are important. I know that in my position with our city, which has 31,000 people, we're extremely stretched for resources to do text amendments. And we are one of those cities that has created our own codes internally, but we have had to use consultants just like you've described. And that process can be painful and time consuming, and you often don't get out of it what you'd like. So I think there's some real innovation here. And I'd like to ask all those who are participating, if they have questions, to go ahead and weigh in now. I've got a million, but we want to hear from those who've been listening in. So please raise your hand and we'll recognize you and get you into the chat. Well, I'm not seeing anybody so far who has a question. So if no one's going to speak up, I think I'll just go ahead and try to fill in the blanks. But I know there's got to be some questions out there. One thing, I'll give you a little experience I had just a couple of days ago that was a little disheartening. I liked what was said in your presentation today about public input. There is never enough public input. Never, ever, ever. And there's never a process where people feel satisfied that they have been included. The other night, we went out and held a meeting with some folks in their neighborhood about a proposed trail through their neighborhood. And here we were in their backyards talking to them, and it was a barrage of negativity. It was finger pointing and yelling and accusation. We didn't know. Why didn't we know about this? Why didn't we know about that? It was exhausting. And so even when we had gotten people to the meeting and commenting to us, it still was, I did not know, and you're not doing a good enough job. So there's still work to be done. And I know all of you who are participating know that too. Okay, we have a couple of people in chat. Let's go to those real quickly. We have Carrie Call, who has written in. Her question is, can a council member begin writing an ordinance on their own? And when, how should they present it to the council for discussion? Excellent question. Somebody like to answer that from the
I'll
presenters?
just tell you right now, it's interesting because I've been on the city side and now the consulting side. City council members can absolutely do that. We always try to preach that the planning commissioners are like the real planners of the community. Yeah, that happens. But yeah, you can do it. Here's what we would say. If I was a city council member and I wanted to, like the straightest path to improvement, first thing I would do is go check what your existing situation is. You're probably, as a representative, you're probably hearing, what the pain point is from a certain point of view. It's critical you understand what that is. But it's just as critical to figure out what is really written on the books. Not just, oh, well, we better fix it. Maybe you're not enforcing it correctly. Maybe it's not clearly understood, whatever. Go figure out what it is first. Also, in that process, do not ignore your general plan. If it's the issue, you might have talked about it in the plan. And if you have the justification and, the community bought in theoretically with the general plan, the community bought in and said, we want to do this, we want this outcome. Then you have all kinds of backing, and you could bring that up to the council. Hey, I'm hearing this is a problem. I think we should solve it. I'm willing to do some legwork on it. Now that, again, you heard our Netflix presentation. If you were to go and do your own research, because, as Paul mentioned, because you got all kinds of time on your hands and nothing else to do than to research, the ombudsman's findings, the state statute, the
State Supreme Court.
Yeah, state Supreme Court, the federal Supreme Court. If you've got time to do that, Godspeed, and we need your business card and resume. If you don't, that's where you do want to get some way to speed things up. I think that's one of our, not trying to self-promote here, but one of the secret sauce that seems to work pretty well for rural community consultants. We do projects all over the state. And so when we go to a town over here, we've kind of heard the conversation that they're starting to have. And we could speed things up and say, go talk to this town, they're doing it right, or don't talk to that town, they're going to be in the headlines next.
Yeah,
Oh,
go ahead, Paul.
Go ahead, Ryan. Sorry.
Well, I was going to say before Ben could jump in, and we'll end it on Ben with something intelligent, so I'll jump in when people don't remember. And this is a shameless plug too. I saw Carrie's next question was, what if there's nothing written at all? With one of the things that we did, Mike touched on this really well, but one of the things we do is we came up with a model code in the Civic Link. We found that the majority of stuff is going to be kind of similar wherever you go, but there's also sections where you can customize it and tailor fit it to your community. This gives you a really good starting point. I think it's really intimidating to look at a blank sheet of paper and go, oh, I've got to write a short-term rental ordinance off the top of my head. Like Mike said, spend all that hour doing that. These documents are meant to give you a really good starting point so you can start that discussion and have a productive go down that path discussion instead of just, well, let's copy what our neighbor did and then we'll kind of tweak it here and there and call it good there. So that's a good starting out point, and that would be a good spot to bring it to the council.
And to your point, when you're writing an ordinance, legality of the ordinance is often fairly similar. So if you're talking about a form or a template where you're talking about the meat that you're trying to change, for many ordinances that will work. Very specific, it might not work so well, but if you have something simple like nightly rentals, a template or form could help out very much. Looks like Mike Wilcox, you talk about design guidelines, but my understanding is that guidelines are enforceable. If they're adopted as standards, then are they? Thoughts? Second question there is, my understanding is guidelines are shoulds and standards are shalls, but I'd like your input. Yes, yes, and yes, you are correct. So what it is, and there's a reason we put in there that they need to be amended to your general plan. There's several steps with what people call guidelines that gets them to the point where it's enforceable. You have to attach it to an overlay or a zoning designation, a geographic area of some kind, a zoning designation of some kind, and put it into the general plan as being attached to that specific designation. Additionally, you can attach them as a community if you have numerous sets of guidelines. If you have guidelines for the downtown, if you have guidelines for residential, whatever it may be, those are all attached to the general plan or comp plan, depending on however you're going to state it. And those do make them enforceable by the code enforcement office.
I'd like to chime in on that one as well, Ben. As somebody who's worked in the redevelopment of a downtown area here in Holiday, we have had, I got to tell you how difficult it's been to get our downtown looking the way that it is, even with our standards being codified. So the language in your ordinance, which is enforceable, you've got to be very careful about the shalls and the mays and the shoulds and the ought tos. We are currently in the process of revisioning our downtown code because we've had some developers come into our downtown area who want to be here, but they have their own vision of what their building should look like. And it would starkly contrast with what's been built. And so as staff, you end up finding yourself fighting tooth and nail for what everybody ought to know. And what's obvious is what the standard is. But if developers can drive a loophole through your ordinance and build something you don't want, they will. And they might, they absolutely can, and you're stuck. So that's an excellent point.
You hit it right there. But the important thing is your guidelines have to be built upon that unified vision for your community. Yep. Because without having that unified vision, you don't know what the residents want. And with that unified vision, council is empowered when a developer comes in and says, no, I want to put in a 15-story skyscraper. Council can go, absolutely, that does not meet our community's vision or our goal for our community as a whole.
Yeah.
Another example of that that's really great. I always direct towns to Bryan Head town, ski resort up above between Parowan and Cedar. They have a strategic plan and they operate off of it. They have agenda items that are tied to their strategic plans. But the cool part is they have a vision statement. And you normally think, oh, that was 90s corporate stuff. The vision statement is super clear and so helpful. In Bryan Head, it says something, we're a mountain community, we're rural, rustic. They kind of describe their brand. And so if you were to say, yeah, your, stereotypical McDonald's thing isn't going to match up here. If they didn't have that branding and that conversation all the time inside the city council, it's on the letterhead, it's in their logo. If they don't have that established, then it's going to be really hard to tell them, no, we're not doing orange and yellow plastic. So.
True. More questions out there? These are excellent questions, by the way. And they only touch on a portion of your whole presentation, which I thought was pretty sweeping in scope. I don't think there's a planner that I know that hasn't been guilty, or a city that I know that hasn't been guilty of borrowing, of plagiarizing, of cutting and pasting somebody else's ordinance. But the real danger in that, after having been in the profession for so long as I have, is that you realize somebody wrote an ordinance in Peoria in 1968, and there are people still cutting and pasting and living with the legacy of what came out of Sun City. I mean, think about it. It's terrible.
Exactly right.
It's because they're desperate and they need a fix now, and so they borrow from somewhere that may not be in context, and soon it's outdated, and then you're going back and redoing it. So
you know what, you're so spot on. Ryan and I, we talk about, we're basically becoming ordinance genealogists. That's how big of nerds we are. But we can actually go to some towns and you pull the code out and you're like, I know I have read this before. That's Orem mid 80s, or that's Park City 5 years ago. And there's a thread of, and it's funny because the towns, they'll just propagate the same one. And it's funny because what you're doing is you're just inheriting their sins. You're just,
yes,
bringing their weeds into your garden. And you're just thinking, wait, the code was wrong back then and it's still wrong now. Why are we copying it?
yeah.
Well, the best part is when they don't take out all the wrong names and you're in Orem and they put Park City in it.
Yes.
That's true.
Oh, that is my favorite.
Another good one too is when they talk in their code or in their general plan, it talks about this airport they have and this is middle of nowhere Utah. There's no birds don't fly there, but they copied it from Provo or from St. George, and they talk about an airport, so they put their airport zone, or they put their what their vision for the airport is going to be.
Well, and I think the sad thing about that, for those who are listening in, those cities out there, is that that really dings your reputation. Your credibility really circles the drain quickly when they can go in and see that you really haven't put any effort or thought into creating a good development plan for your city, a good general plan, a good master plan, good ordinances. If you're just cutting and pasting, guess what? You're going to be anywhere America.
Mhm.
You're not going to be unique. And yet, if you go to any community and ask them what's important to them, is they universally they'll say, we're unique, we're different than everybody, but their ordinances don't reflect how they feel inside. And so that's a real tragedy. And I think everybody needs to look in terms of who they really are and design their codes and ordinances around it. Looks like there's a real resource with what you're proposing here. Other questions? We've got a few minutes left, maybe 3 or 4. We're doing all the talking because we're not hearing from you, but we really want to hear your bugaboo questions, philosophical or otherwise.
Or what you're having for lunch. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're consultants. We can tell you what's good.
Well, cinnamon rolls and Parowan.
Yeah, that's right. We could get those.
Please don't get me started on that.
Is that an inside joke? What?
So I grew up in Parowan, and
They have good cinnamon rolls there?
this isn't recorded, so it's fine. But I lived there for 20-something years, and I didn't know we had good cinnamon rolls until about 5 years ago when they decided they have good cinnamon rolls. So that's our big claim to fame there now, is cinnamon rolls that nobody knows.
Yeah.
But that's just between us. It's not recorded. So
Roger Brooks went to town and said, "What are you known for?" And somebody said, "Well, cinnamon rolls," and that was it.
Yeah. You know, Roger's an interesting guy, his program. I often ask the question as a city planner in the cities that I've worked for. I've said, tell me what we should be known for, what we are known for. And I usually start out by just saying, okay, if I name a city, if I say Farmington, Utah, what's the first thing that pops into your head?
Station
And
Park.
almost every, what?
Station Park.
Yeah, or Lagoon, right? Station Park. I live right by Station Park. But you know, in years gone by, if you named a community, you said, okay, you know, Bountiful, what's the icon? What do you think of? That's really critical because a lot of people, they instantly know outside of your community what you're known for, but do you?
Yeah.
And so communities often don't have a real identity. And I'll tell you, in Holiday now, I think a lot of people know Holiday as a well-to-do area or an area that's kind of lush with trees, but increasingly, and I'm doing a shameless plug for our downtown, but if you want to see some downtown development in Utah, that where we've worked very, very hard to create something, a sense of place, you can come down here and see it. We're kind of in the mid-bench of the Salt Lake Valley. We encourage you to come down here, maybe glean some ideas. We hosted a mobile tour on Monday, had a group of people come and tour our village. That's the 29th group that's come to the Holiday Village to see what we've done. So anyway, we're about out of time. Thank you for allowing me to plug our community a little bit. And thanks for the work that you guys are doing out there. Mike, Ryan, and Ben, excellent presentation. All of you who've participated today, we hope you got something out of it. Again, these sessions are available from the league. You can contact those who've presented today for further information. Any last words from our presenters before you go?
I just appreciate what you just discussed there, Paul, with your downtown. You talked about how you were building it deliberately. It didn't just happen. You guys worked on it, and you know, ordinances, we try to make it as easy as possible and take the tears out of it. It's still work, and it's still critical. I mean, of all the work you're going to do, it's written down, so to speak. It's going to be there for a while. So
yeah, I remember I had a planning commissioner a few years ago in an intense discussion say, well, you know, I'm not sure what we do, you know, should we just kind of stand pat? And I said, okay, well, look, we can be as mediocre as we want to be.
yeah.
And everybody chuckled, and then they all said, oh, you're right. I said, look, are we going to raise the bar? Are we going to raise the bar? Are we going to really put our money where our mouth is and say that our community really is important? Or are we just going to go through the motions? So mediocrity can reign, or you can raise the bar and be proud of what you are as a community. But these kinds of resources are so critical to cities that are always stretched for money for planning, because as we all know, planning is kind of we call it the stepchild of everything else, public works, engineering, whatever. We have an inferiority complex.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone. Enjoy your day. Be safe out there. Thanks again, guys, for your presentation.
Thanks all. Take care.
All right.